Look into my eyes. I have lived for thousands of years, watching generations appear, build their worlds, and disappear into silence. I witnessed humanity's greatest philosophies being born. I watched temples rise toward the heavens, cities emerge from dust, and empires spread across continents. I remember the poets, the warriors, the kings, and the dreamers who believed civilization could finally conquer chaos. But I also witnessed something else, something hidden beneath marble columns, golden palaces, and glorious monuments. I saw the darkest corners of the human mind, places where intelligence was no longer used to create, but to perfect suffering. Have you ever wondered what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of a ruler who fears no court, no God, and no judgment beyond his own? Death ceases to be a simple punishment. It becomes a performance, a warning, and sometimes a carefully engineered work of demonic art. The ancient world transformed suffering into theater, desperate cries into music, and public death into a language understood by everyone. Tonight, I will guide you along a road paved with ash, iron, and forgotten blood. You will enter the furnaces of ancient Greece. You will drift beneath the burning sun of Persia. You will stand inside Rome's arenas and beneath the shadow of royal elephants. These are 10 of the cruelest execution methods ever recorded or claimed in the ancient world. Hold your lamp tightly. The darkness ahead is deeper than it appears. And whatever you do, do not look away. I remember Sicily in the 6th century before Christ, when the prosperous city of Akragas lived beneath a tyrant's shadow. Its ruler was Phalaris, a man whose reputation for cruelty survived long after his palaces and armies disappeared. According to later Greek tradition, Phalaris wanted an execution that was not merely frightening, but strangely artistic. Then a craftsman named Persilaus arrived at the royal court, carrying plans for an extraordinary bronze creation. It was a life-sized bull cast from bronze, hollow inside, with a concealed door built into its side. A fire could be lit beneath its belly, gradually transforming the beautiful sculpture into a sealed furnace. But the most disturbing feature was hidden inside the animal's head, a carefully designed network of metal pipes. The pipes were said to transform a human cry into the deep roar of an enraged animal. Legend says Phalaris invited Persilaus to enter the bull and demonstrate his invention from inside. The inventor allegedly became its first victim, a warning that those who create cruelty may eventually be consumed by it. If the brazen bull represented death through fire, the punishment known as scaphism represented something far slower, a death measured not in minutes, but in days. According to the Greek writer Plutarch, the condemned prisoner was placed inside a narrow wooden boat. A second boat was fitted over the first, trapping the body between them, with only the head, hands, and feet left exposed. The victim was then force-fed milk and honey, and more honey was spread across the exposed skin. Afterward, the boats were taken into a stagnant marsh and abandoned beneath the burning sun. The sweetness attracted insects, the heat worsened the body's condition, and the enclosed space slowly became its own prison. The victim was reportedly fed again each day, not out of mercy, but to keep death from arriving too quickly. One of the most famous stories concerns a soldier named Mithridates, who allegedly boasted that he, not the king's version of events, deserved the glory. Plutarch claimed Mithridates survived for 17 days, but he wrote centuries later, and no Persian device has ever been found. The story may be true, exaggerated, or political horror, yet its image remains impossible to forget. 2 boats, a silent marsh, and a death prolonged beneath the sun. The Romans did not invent crucifixion, but I watched them transform it into one of history's most terrifying public warnings. The condemned were often forced through crowded streets while carrying a heavy wooden crossbeam across their shoulders. The procession ensured that humiliation began long before the victim ever reached the place of execution. Outside the city, an upright post might already be waiting, weathered by sun and prepared to be used again. There was no single Roman procedure. The shape, position, and method of fastening could vary from one execution to another. Some victims were secured with rope, while others were fixed with iron. Simple materials turned into instruments of imperial control. Crucifixion was not designed for speed. It prolonged exposure, thirst, exhaustion, and the growing struggle to breathe. Rome generally reserved this punishment for slaves, rebels, bandits, and those placed outside the protection of respectable society. Some people mocked the condemned. Others barely looked upward because public suffering had become part of the landscape. The cross was more than wood and iron. It was Rome's message to everyone watching. This is what happens when you resist. In Rome, I watched death cease to be merely punishment and become entertainment for an entire city. The sentence was called damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, and escape was rarely part of the performance. Slaves, rebels, captured enemies, and forbidden religious groups could all be placed beneath the judgment of the crowd. Beneath the stone seats, lions, leopards, bears, and wild boars waited inside dark underground cages. Every creature transported from a distant province became living proof that Rome believed it controlled the known world. These executions often occurred at midday, while spectators ate, drank, and waited for the afternoon gladiators. Some prisoners were tied to posts. Others received weapons too weak to offer any realistic chance of survival. Sometimes the condemned were dressed as mythological characters, turning familiar legends into performances with real and fatal endings. When the iron gate began to rise, the first great roar often came not from the animal, but from the audience. The condemned person was no longer treated as human, only another spectacle placed between the morning hunt and the afternoon games. In Rome, rulers released wild beasts. Across parts of South and Southeast Asia, I watched kings command something far larger. The elephant was not a wild animal acting in anger. It was trained to understand and obey precise human commands. The sentence unfolded before the royal court, where a prisoner knelt while the ruler watched from an elevated throne. The crowd watched the elephant, but the elephant watched its handler, and the handler watched the king. A single gesture could order a rapid death or transform the punishment into a deliberately prolonged display of royal control. The animal could restrain, lift, or move a human body with terrifying precision, always responding to the handler above. Some later accounts describe blades attached to elephant tusks, though the practice varied greatly across different rulers and regions. At the final moment, the king could order the elephant to stop and turn terror into a performance of mercy. Yet the mercy belonged to the same ruler who created the terror and decided how close death would come. The elephant became executioner, instrument, and symbol, proof that even the largest creature on earth obeyed the throne. Long before later European legends, I watched ancient Assyrian rulers use impalement to terrify conquered populations. The punishment was not hidden behind prison walls. It was placed beside roads, gates, and conquered cities. A sharpened wooden stake became both an execution instrument and a monument to imperial authority. Some accounts describe executioners positioning the stake carefully so that death would not arrive immediately. The victim's own weight could prolong the ordeal, turning gravity itself into part of the sentence. Raised above the road, the condemned became a warning visible to soldiers, travelers, and entire families. The Assyrian state wanted survivors to remember the site and carry its message into every neighboring city. Later, royal artists carved scenes of punishment into palace walls so that the warning would outlive the execution. Kings may have exaggerated their cruelty, but exaggeration itself revealed what they wanted their enemies to fear. The prisoners vanished, the empire collapsed, but when its palaces were uncovered, the Assyrian king was still speaking through stone. Inside the palaces of Assyrian kings, I saw punishment transformed into art, carved permanently across walls of stone. Royal inscriptions claimed that rebel leaders were flayed, and that their remains became warnings displayed before conquered populations. The punishment attacked more than the body because skin carried a person's face, age, scars, and visible identity. To remove that outer layer was symbolically to strip away the person and reduce a human being to an object. The process demanded control, sharp tools, and deliberate precision, another example of intelligence being turned toward cruelty. Without its natural protection, the body could no longer regulate heat or defend itself from shock and infection. For the ruler, death was not the conclusion. The warning was intended to remain after the victim disappeared. Foreign envoys, officials, and servants walked past these images, learning the cost of resisting before they ever met the king. Ancient rulers exaggerated their victories, but every exaggeration reveals the fear they wanted future enemies to carry. The victims vanished thousands of years ago, yet the images of their punishment still stare back at us from stone. I watched rulers transform an ordinary cooking vessel into an execution chamber large enough to hold a human being. Different accounts describe water, oil, animal fat, pitch, and other heavy liquids being used across different regions and centuries. Beneath the vessel, servants stacked wood, while the condemned watched the machinery of death being assembled in plain sight. In some stories, the liquid was heated first, creating a rapid shock when the sentence finally began. Other accounts describe something more calculated, placing the prisoner inside first while the liquid was still cold. Only afterward was the fire lit, allowing the temperature to rise slowly enough for every stage to be understood. The psychological terror began before the heat became dangerous, because the victim could see the fire and understand what was coming. As the body overheated, breathing failed, the nervous system entered shock, and consciousness could disappear. Yet many popular retellings combine different countries and centuries, making certainty difficult and exaggeration dangerously easy. What remains unforgettable is the design. The same fire used to prepare food was turned into a slow instrument of fear. Across scattered ancient and later accounts, I encountered a punishment designed to destroy not only life, but human wholeness. Some stories describe the condemned being suspended upside down from a tall wooden frame before the execution began. The inverted position forced blood toward the head, potentially delaying unconsciousness and prolonging awareness. Two executioners stood on opposite sides, each holding one end of a long metal saw. The movement required rhythm. One man pulled, the other answered, turning execution into measured physical labor. The punishment carried a brutal message. The condemned person would be denied even the unity of the human body. Yet later, artists often illustrated the punishment with more precision than the surviving historical evidence can support. Similar stories appear across different cultures and centuries, but they may not describe one standardized historical practice. The inverted position also carried symbolic power, forcing the condemned to face the world from an unnatural final perspective. Whether common practice or amplified legend, the image endured. Two men, one saw, and a body transformed into a warning. In another punishment, The human body itself became a battlefield between opposing forces. The condemned person's arms and legs were said to be tied to 4 horses facing 4 separate directions. The sentence relied on animal strength, but only under strict human control. At a signal from the authorities, the horses would lunge outward at once. Yet historical accounts suggest the human body did not always separate as easily as legend claimed. In some cases, additional cutting or assistance may have been required before the punishment reached its final form. The symbolism was unmistakable. A person who challenged authority would be broken into pieces and scattered. The punishment was meant not only to kill, but to prove that resistance would be torn apart by the state. One body became a public lesson, stretched between the power of animals, law, and spectacle. Whether described in law or amplified by later retellings, the image endured. 4 horses, 4 roads, and one final act of division. I have crossed thousands of years to bring you these stories, carrying the voices of people whose names history allowed to disappear. Looking backward, it is easy to call the people of the ancient world savages, monsters, or creatures from a darker age. But these punishments were not created by darkness itself. They were designed by intelligent human minds and constructed by human hands. They were rulers, craftsmen, priests, and citizens made of flesh and blood. Human beings not entirely different from you or me. A civilization can build libraries and prisons together, celebrate philosophy while transforming suffering into carefully organized public entertainment. The boundary between civilization and barbarism is not a great wall. Sometimes it is thinner than the edge of a blade. The protections many people possess today were shaped by centuries of suffering, resistance, reform, and lives that official records forgot. History is not a distant land inhabited only by monsters. It is a mirror, and its reflection is often closer than we wish. I remember the hands that built the temples, the hands that forged the chains, and the victims those rulers tried to erase. I am history. I am still watching, remembering, and writing. Until our next journey, keep your lamp burning, and never stop questioning the darkness.